So as I assume most of you know, or at least some of you know, we have bison on the North Rim. And the park has been talking for at least probably 10 years about how we should manage this bison herd. Okay. So a little background. These bison were brought here initially to the House Rock Wildlife Area, which is near Vermilion Cliffs, by a cattle rancher who was trying to crossbreed bison and cattle. Failed at that. In about 1929, the state took over management of that herd in House Rock Valley, which is managed by the Kaibab National Forest. In the late 90s, you can also see some historic pictures there. I think I just pressed the wrong button, but in the late 90s, the bison started wandering from House Rock Valley up to the Kaibab Plateau and into the park. It continually migrated back, mostly to calve, but less and less every year, until in 2009 they no longer returned to House Rock Valley. The current population estimates are at 400 to 600 animals, which is a lot of animals given this habitat and given how small their range is. Current modeling estimates say that if we do not do anything, in the next 10 years there will be 1,500 animals on the landscape. So a little bit of background of where these bison are. You can see this is the range of the bison that we've gotten from overflights and from GIS collars. You can see that primarily they're in the park. That black line at the top is the park boundary. They do go into the Kaibab National Forest a little bit, but not very much. The turquoise and the orange are the primary summer ranges. The dark blue on Powell Plateau is where they spend winter most of the time. After the Fuller Fire in 2015, a lot got opened up on the Walhalla Plateau, and they started wintering there as well. So some of the reasons that we're concerned about this bison herd is some impacts to the park. As you can see, there's a lot of resource impacts. The first image is of water and hydrology. The left image is a pre-bison picture. The right is the post-bison picture. This is affecting the aquatic species that live on this, the plants, the wildlife, the insects, and potentially even the water flow in that karst system that Natalie was describing. Top right, vegetation. Again, a pre-bison image and a post-image bison. Post-image bison, we've got a lot more non-native plants, and we also have less native plants going to flower and seed. This also affects our pollinators. It also affects our cultural resources. There's a lot of wallows that happen on lithic scatters. We have complaints from our traditional tribes that some of their sacred areas are being destroyed by bison activity. And they're even creating their own new trails. Soils are being impacted. This image on the lower right is from a satellite image. That trail, those holes, those are all bison damage that is visible from satellite imagery. So some of the damage is impaction. Some of it is causing it to blow away more because there's less vegetation. And of course, it's also affecting other wildlife, partially through direct competition and also through habitat damage. So what is our purpose for taking action and managing this herd instead of letting it be native? It's to protect the Grand Canyon natural and cultural resources in conjunction with our cooperating agencies who also have some mandate to manage this herd. So by December of 2017, the park signed an environmental assessment, actually the regional director did, which was undertaken with these cooperating agencies, which lines out a short-term reduction of the bison herd, noticing that we have to do something right away. We're not really sure what our long-term management will be, but let's at least get them down. So this EA had a selected action which primarily said, hey, we need to reduce the animal herd to below 200 animals as quickly as possible. We chose the methods of non-lethal culling, i.e. corralling and live capture and shipping to tribal nations, and lethal culling with skilled volunteers in cooperation with the state. We also noted that we need to coordinate with a state that has active hunting of bison right outside the boundaries and use that to our advantage as well. So what did we do in 2018? Well, we started implementation planning. the number one thing we had to do was figure out how are we going to implement this selected action, right? So first we had to plan how we were going to build a corral, who was going to build it, etc., for the live captures. On the upper right, you will see the corral that actually did get installed in 2018. We had conversations about lethal culling. Unfortunately, in midsummer, there were some major disagreements with the state on how we were going to do the lethal culling. Those agreements are ongoing, but at this point, the state has really reduced its participation with us. So at this point, there's still conversations on that. We had to do a lot of agreements with other parties. We had to write agreements up with the Intertribal Buffalo Council. They are the people who are going to transport all the live bison to the tribes that wish to have them. We had to work with the states that they were going to go through, the states where they were going to end up, the tribal lands where they were going to go up. What diseases did we have to test for? What vaccinations do we have to do? Lots of work, groundwork to put in to get that to happen. We were hoping to do a pilot corralling in October of 2018, and we were geared up completely to do that. We started baiting in October, late September, early October, and unfortunately, as some of you may know, we had one of the wettest, coldest falls on record, and this caused the bison to go to their winter ranges on Powell Plateau much earlier than normal. And about a week after we started baiting, they completely disappeared from the area. So I pulled the trigger and decided we'll postpone it. We also did a lot of bison monitoring. We have 7 satellite collars and 3 radio collars out there. We are monitoring where they're going. We're doing overflights to see how big that population is. We monitor if they get hit and how many young are they having every year. We're also doing a lot of resource monitoring. We're monitoring the vegetation. We're monitoring the cultural artifacts. We're monitoring the karst sinkholes. We're monitoring a lot of things. And part of this monitoring is not only to document what's going on now, but so that hopefully we can keep documenting that a reduction in the herd will benefit these resources. So what's up for 2019? Well, we're hoping to do that pilot corralling this year. I think it's very likely that that will happen. Like I said, we were completely ready to go with that, other than the bison went elsewhere. So that will involve sending live bison to tribes. Again, the Intertribal Buffalo Council, which has many member tribes, will decide which tribes those will go to. It also involves data collection. We'll be collecting blood for both disease testing, genetics testing. We'll put collars, more collars on animals that we're going to release. We won't send animals that are currently nursing or moms, calves that are dependent on moms, or very old bison. So it's an opportunity for us to put more collars out. Again, get a better handle on where they're going and how many there are. And of course, we are going to keep going with the planning for culling. Right now, the conversation is at the level of the superintendent's office. So she's talking with the state. We're trying to work out an agreement that is amenable to both agencies and works well with both of our separate mandates. That's really the core key of the conflict. And so I don't know when that's going to happen, but we have definitely not taken that off the table. We will continue monitoring bison. We will continue resource monitoring. And this is what it looks like out there right now. In case you're wondering, on the left, that's our new corral site. On the right, this is a bison following a snow machine trail. So feel free to, I'm going to take questions now, but if you have additional questions, we do have an email set up specifically for bison questions because we get a lot. There's a lot of people who are very interested in our management of this herd. So that corral is in Lower Little Park. It is off the road. It's not visible. We don't really want it to be visible. If you're familiar at all with Yellowstone, we really don't want protesters or just common visitors saying, hey, what's going on? Let me go check that out. We don't want to stress the bison out more than necessary. But it's fairly accessible because we have to bring in livestock trailers, right? So honestly, it doesn't matter what kind of animal this is. There's too many. The genetics are irrelevant to the cause. And so that's the number one reason, is that the genetics really have nothing to do with them being too many. The other reason is really a sensitivity to our tribal partners. Tribal partners have a real issue with us using blood amounts to determine whether you are something or not. And this goes back to their history. I won't go into it immensely, but it looks like a bison, it acts like a bison. For all intents and purposes, it is a bison.
So, like, some of the was on legal calling whatever it is.
So no, the EA did not anticipate that. We did anticipate, and part of the reason our negotiations with the state are very careful is that the state has tried to use the legislature to change the laws over who has authority on wildlife on our lands. I have not read the language in this bill, but lethal culling with skilled volunteers is not new in the Park Service. It has been used in Rocky Mountain for elk and in Teddy Roosevelt for elk. It's used in Hawaii volcanoes for all kinds of non-native ungulates. It's been used in the Everglades to deal with their invasive pythons. So this is not a new system. Part of what made us choose that is the history of bison, the history of feds going in and sharp shooting animals, and the sensitivity to the fact that there are not a lot of populations of bison where people can shoot them, and that hunters and the state were very concerned about the human population's opportunities to shoot bison. So all these things came into our decision for why lethal culling with skilled volunteers was chosen. They are in multiple groups all over the place. If you're familiar with Little Park Lake, that seems to be a common area that all the different groups come to. And they do follow all the springs and the meadows from the springs, and they've created quite the trail network there. So it seems that at some of these springs, they remix and then separate out, but they're not generally all in one herd at a time. But they genetically are all related. Yeah. So the Powell Plateau is used in winter. None of them are in Dumont Meadow right now. None of them are any of those places you see them in the summer. They're all on actually the rim. They're in Powell Plateau and Walhalla, often right on the rim, down where places where we might tell people it's not really safe to go stand. They like it there. It's sunny, it's warm, they can get vegetation easier. So there's several different springs outside of that meadow where we see them concentrate. Basin Springs is another area where we have a lot. Fawn Springs, Robbers Roost. Again, they do in the pre-monsoon spring months and summer months like the springs, because just like any other animal, water is a limiting source for them. Okay, somebody here had a question?
Is there a wasting disease now too that is also a problem?
Not with bison. So one of the good things for our herd is brucellosis, chronic wasting disease, a whole bunch of different diseases that are a problem in bison elsewhere have never been identified in their herd. They also don't exist in any of the wildlife populations around them, so there's no source population for them. This is very helpful for us when we're trying to move them across state lines. So it is not they were there in the 1900s, so 100 years, yes, right? But pre-introduction, it is not fully known. However, I will say this, there is very little amount of bison in the archaeological record. If you look at other places that had bison, they used bison jumps as a main way to harvest those animals. Grand Canyon has what I would presume the best bison jump in the world. There is no evidence of large piles of bison bones anywhere. There is some. Now, also in my experience as a wildlife biologist, these large ungulates, particularly juvenile males, will go hundreds of miles outside of their range. And my guess is occasionally a bison showed up here, and occasionally they got killed and eaten. If they did occur here at all, we were at the southernmost edge of their range, and they never occurred here in large numbers, nor did they stay for long periods of time. So at this point, again, we know that there'll be a long-term EA or EIS. It depends. We don't know the scope of that project at this point. Part of why we did not go beyond a short-term environmental assessment is we know with lethal culling, for example, we will essentially be hazing these bison. All of these bison are shot pretty much as soon as they get out of the park. So we're hoping that this is going to change their distribution at least around the Kaibab Plateau. So what the impact of our current reduction activities will have on the bison will play a role in how we manage them in the future. Will they become less accustomed to staying in the park? Will they range more widely? Will they become adverse to certain areas because of our activities? These are all things that we need to find out. At this point, I suspect that our number of below 200 bison will still be the same number. And that below 200 would be ranging on the Kaibab Plateau, plateau-wide, not just within the park boundaries. I have to ask Jack if I can take one more. Okay.
Do we know what the Native Americans plan to do about that area? Are they going to use it as food source?
So there's a lot of Native American tribes who have great historical ties and cultural and spiritual ties to bison. Many of them are starting their own herds or have their own herds. These herds do eventually end up in their food supply. They are used for parts and pieces. They are used ceremonially. But a lot of them are trying to start or, again, augment their own herds on their own lands. None of our traditionally associated tribes have expressed an interest in that. Another reason why I kind of doubt that they had a historic presence here. All right, sorry, come find me later. Thank you very much.